Welcome to Ndtr Spotlight, the corner of the internet where Ndtr shine. I'm your host, Marie Lorraine, and scheduling spotlights and reaching out to former, current, and future NDTRs is so much fun, but sometimes it's tricky with the scheduling. And today I am elated. I'm so excited because our guest today, we had set up times to talk twice and they both got canceled, but third time's the charm. So this spotlight was meant to be because it's happening today. I'm very, very excited. Our guest today, her name is Mariah. She has a bachelor's in nutrition. And she has been a DTR for 3 years. However, she just became a registered dietitian. So she is an NDTR who used that credential and then has advanced to become a registered dietitian. So very exciting story. She has her foundation or her beginning of a career working in community nutrition and is now going to be a clinical dietitian. So very, very exciting story. We're chatting with her in the part of her life where there's this big transition. So very exciting time to be able to sit, talk with Mariah and have her kind of reflect on her career, share her story with us, and hopefully you'll be encouraged by what you hear or what you're watching as she shares her story. So without further ado, Mariah, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super excited it's happening.
Yeah, right. Finally, yes, because COVID and all the little hurdles in life, but it's happening today. And so with every guest, I want to know, how did you first find out about the NDTR credential?
So actually, I was wanting to get my RD credentials, and I wanted to do an internship after college. But a month after I graduated, I actually got married. And so that was kind of took me on a different path. And then I waited a little bit and I wasn't ready to do the dietetic internship. And so I kind of did some my own research and found the NDTR credentials and thought that would be the best choice for me at that time.
Well, congratulations on getting married.
Thank you.
I love that you didn't like stop marriage to do the dietitian. You like valued the, the marriage and that milestone in your life. So did you know about the NDTR credential in undergrad, or was it the wedding that made you think, oh, maybe I need to do something else?
I think it was mostly the wedding. I'm not sure. It feels like forever ago that I went to school. But I think they might have mentioned it there, but I was so focused on RD at the time that it really was the marriage and the wedding that kind of was like, oh, maybe I need to do a little bit of a slower way to get to RD.
Yeah, or just a different way. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
differently.
still, and you've gotten there. So it's so nice talking to you at this point in the story because it's like it's happened and it's exciting. So, what was that process like looking at the NDTR credential once you were out of school and kind of on your own in the academic sense?
Yeah, so it was a little bit tougher, I feel like, just because I had graduated 2 years prior. And so it was kind of like getting a refresher course on all of the courses that we did throughout undergrad. And so I really just kind of buckled down and I got the CDR study guide for the NDTR and went through that and then just reviewed on my own anything that I felt I need a little bit more information on or things like that. And so that's kind of how that worked for me in that way.
So, you mentioned 2 years after graduation. So, what were those 2 years before the DTR credential? What was that like for you? What did you do there?
Yeah, so actually it was a little funny and it worked out perfectly. I went to our local family resource center here in Elko, Nevada, and it's a very rural area, so I didn't have a ton of opportunities right away. And I was just going to volunteer to do some nutrition classes just to teach some to the community. And they saw that I had a bachelor's in nutrition, which is a requirement for a WIC nutritionist. And they needed one because they were contracting out through Reno. And so I actually got hired pretty much right there just to be WIC nutritionist.
Oh, wow, that's great. So that was your in onto WIC. You're putting yourself out there to get experience and you were able to land a job. So with the credential of just needing that bachelor's, why get the DTR credential? What was your reasoning behind that?
Yeah, so I thought it would help me, especially since it was a different path. I know a lot of my fellow students just went into a DI right after undergrad and everything, and they had tons of clinical experience. And I wanted to make sure that I had something to help me stand out on my resume and my applications for a DI. And it also helped me really to just refresh the information and to provide excellent nutrition counseling to my WIC participants.
Yeah, that's so it sounds like it was like a refresher to even make you even better at what you were doing at WIC, even though it wasn't a requirement at the WIC
Mhm.
clinic you're working at. That's super refreshing. So you are taking how you use the CDR study exam for the Dtr exam. What was studying like and taking the exam like? How did you handle and manage all of that with working?
Yes, so it was really nice because we would have appointments and then I would have some miscellaneous, but I was able to study sometimes during when I didn't have appointments. So that was really refreshing and nice. But also I just took time and kind of made a schedule of when I would reasonably have time. So maybe not every single day for hours upon hours, but just 1 or 2 hours a day, and going through different concepts and making sure I kind of understood what was going on. Um, and the NDTR, I know it was a little bit more, I'm not sure maybe now, but it was more food service related. So I really did focus on that a lot more too.
Yeah, the NDTR credential has a lot of food service, or the test has a lot of food service on the exam because it doesn't have as much of the clinical aspects that the registered dietitian exam has. So yeah, and that food service can be tricky, especially when you're working in a WIC because you're not like surrounded by all of that food
Yes.
service stuff. Oh my. So you took the exam. And so how long did you stay at WIC after becoming an NDTR? Can you continue your story?
Yeah. So then I got my credentials in 2018. And then I recently just left to take on a full-time position somewhere else. And it really was kind of refreshing because I was able to provide, I felt like those credentials helped me be a little bit more um, engaging, I guess, with nutrition education. And it was a little bit more of a comfort for me because you pass the test, you are like, okay, I know what I'm talking about. Even if you kind of knew before, it's like, I have those credentials. Those are going to help me to provide the information that I know is evidence-based and going to really help my participants. And so I stayed there for about, I think, 2.5 years after that.
Yeah, I love that you said that because I mean, it does seem like it's just a test, but just the studying for that exam, it just brings things to remembrance and makes you realize like, and then when you're practicing and studying for that exam, you could then apply everything in a way that is just, you can't really do as a student. So that's exciting. And so in your WIC clinic, were you the only DTR working or were there dietitians? What was that position like for you?
Yeah, so like I said before, it was a really rural area. And so it was only me as a NDTR, and then I through our state office in Carson City, there was a few other NDTRs and RDs, but it was mostly just me, and then I had two other coworkers who were what we consider competent professional authorities. So they're able to provide the basic nutrition education, but if there's somebody who has like gestational diabetes that they need more information on, things like that, then I was able to help more in depth and they'd schedule with me.
Wow, that must have been a very good experience to just start playing with or just educating those more complex diseases in a way that is, practical and simplified because that population, they're moms, they're busy, they don't need all of this education. They need something simple and easy to apply in their lives. So what do any disease states or any clients that you worked with, any stories stand out from your time at WIC and how you impacted these women's lives?
Um, I'm trying to think, and like you said, the more simple the information, the better, because they really don't want to spend an hour talking about one in-depth thing. They're like, I have kids running around, I have kids screaming, like I need to go. And so one actually, it's super simple, but the daughter was a little bit larger on the BMI, but her eating habits seemed okay. And so it took a little while to get in. It turns out she was drinking a lot of milk. And so I was just suggesting, I was like, sometimes this can really affect a kid's appetite. Let's try to cut down and we'll follow up. So she did, she cut down to two glasses of milk a day, and she was doing just so fine, eating a lot more and everything. And the mom was less stressed out and less worried about it. So it's not really an example of a complex case, but really just being there to reassure them. And it could be something so simple that could be causing the problem.
Yeah, that's a great example. And it's those simple fixes that people just don't think about when you're not like saturated in that world of nutrition. And that could be a complex case down the road if she's continuing to not being able to eat those nutrients, the micronutrient imbalances that'll come up, the iron deficiency that might come up from all that milk. So it's nice that you were able to come in there and prevent it from getting super complex and expensive and stressful for that mom. So very important work that you're able to do at WIC. So you're working at WIC and you want to continue your goal for a dietitian. What made you not get complacent staying at WIC? What made you wanted to continue what you originally started out to do when you were an undergrad?
Yeah, I think just because, and it's so funny, originally when I first went to college, I wanted to be in psychology, but I wasn't exactly sure what path I wanted to go on. And I kind of figured just because I'm interested in it doesn't mean that I want to do it for the rest of my life. And so I found nutrition kind of on a whim. And I was so interested in it and so interested in the science behind it and how factual it was, and how much misinformation there is out there. And I think that kind of helped me just setting that goal back then of becoming an RD, and then reassessing that goal and being like, is this what I still want after this many years? And it was. And so that's kind of what pushed me forward, was originally having that goal and then just being in the nutrition field and deciding, yes, this is still what I want to do.
Yes, I relate so much to that, Mariah, because I went to school for something else. I found nutrition. And then I was like, am I going to like this when I'm not studying it? And the Ndtr credential proved that, like, yeah, it's worth continuing to going. So the passion sounds like it stayed for you, and that made you want to go further. So what was that process like, looking for internships and putting yourself out there?
Yes. So it was actually a little scary because you hear all these statistics of being matched to internships and how they're not the greatest. And I joined this Facebook group, and it was just a lot of RD to Bs and some dietitians already, just giving advice and like how to apply, like DICAS and all of that stuff. And so I was like, you know what, it's something I have to do if I want to do this. So let's get going. And so I applied through DICAS and I did the D&D digital, but I really needed an internship that I could do while working, because I was, me and my husband had been married for 2 to 3 years at the time. And he was going to school. He's currently going to school for like med school. And so so it's a lot of work, and I wanted to make sure that we could still support each other, and to just continue eating and surviving and everything. So I needed something super flexible. And so I looked into distance internships, and that's where I found Keith and Associates distance dietetic internship that I applied for.
Oh, distant internships, they scare me. So you have to share with us how that kind of set up. And I'm super curious to know, having that Ndtr credential and the connections you made at WIC, do they help at all with building your own internship experience?
Yes. So what's really nice about, they shorten it to Katie, KADDI. With that program, I was in contact with the director because they were like, make sure you kind of stand out and like make sure they know your name and everything. And so I contacted them with just general questions about the program, and found out that they have prior assessed learning credit. So if you I got pretty much my whole community rotation waived because I had 2 to 3 years at WIC at this point. So I was able to get that waived. So I was really able to focus on clinical and food service, and the business and entrepreneurship rotation that they provided. And so that was really nice, considering I knew quite a bit about the community nutrition already. So that was really awesome. And the difficult part was trying to find preceptors. But I got really blessed here because there is only, including myself now, there's only 5 dietitians in all of the Elko County. And so three of them were working at the hospital locally. So I got to do my clinical and food service at the hospital, and then two have their own businesses. So I was able to do that rotation with them.
Wow, talk about networking power. How
Yeah.
was that process of reaching out to those dietitians? Did you know them as a Ndtr, or was the internship what made you reach out and start networking with the four dietitians in your area?
Yes. So I actually reached out when I was in undergrad to one of them, who is the food service director, or the pretty much the dietary director. So for the clinical and food service sections and everything. I reached out to her when I was in my undergrad just to see if I can do any volunteer experience when I was off in the summer. That took, and I want to encourage people, because it took like about a year or a couple years to really get into a place. Just because, you know, you have to go through all the paperwork and hoops and stuff to make sure you can be there. But I reached out to her, and then I just kind of reached out to one of my preceptors, who was the clinical dietitian there, and just asked if I could. This was about a year or two after I graduated from college. I went in and I just talked to her, and I was like, can I, you know, follow you or shadow you and just kind of see what it's like to make sure that this is what I want to do. And she was like, yeah. And so I remember different scenarios, different cases, and going in there. But I kind of really networked during my undergrad, which is what they told me to do, and they encouraged me to do in my classes. So that finally, when I was ready to take that next step, I had those building blocks and that foundation built, that all I had to do was ask.
That is genius. Prime example of how important that is with the creating your own internship and already having those connections. And I love what you said about planning it beforehand, because it takes time to get into the hospital with all the paperwork, all the red tape, and you're able to set things up in a way that made it the doors just open for you, which is so smart and perfect pace. So, and now you're going to be a clinical dietitian, or wait, let me not get too far ahead of it. So how was the internship experience for you, working with such a tight knit group of dietitians that you've already known?
Yeah, it was really great. I had four preceptors. And like I said, so one, it was the food service director. And it was intimidating at first, you know, especially with that title and how much influence she has over everything and how much she really has responsibility for. And so I didn't want to add to her plate as well. But she was super helpful, and it made me realize what a good, I guess, boss would be and a leader. So she was a good influence in that way. And then my other clinical, I was actually at one of the dialysis clinics, and then at the hospital as well. And they really helped me to kind of see that I would like being in a clinical setting, because I didn't get a lot of experience in undergrad and I was a little nervous. But they really helped set me up and kind of realize what it would be like. And we actually don't get a lot of tube feedings or TPN, but it actually really helped me because we had a few, and then COVID hit. And we had a lot of patients that actually had to be put on a ventilator. And so we really had to know our stuff at that point for tube feeding. So whatever happened in the internship really did prepare me for what I'm doing now. So that was really exciting.
Yeah, that's a lot. Being like having to learn all of that, and really, because people's lives. And so what are you doing now? Talk about, you mentioned having the clinical dietitian job. How did that come about, and what is your day to day?
Yeah, so it's actually, like I said before, I've been really blessed, and it's actually worked out just in a smooth, peaceful path for me, where I got my NDTR, and then I was ready to take the next step for my DI, was accepted into that, found my preceptors, and then at the same time I had my NDTR credentials. So I went in, and then one of the dietitians was wanting to kind of step back from that position, and because she has her own business. And so they hired me on as an NDTR, with the, I guess, future expectations that I would become an RD as well. And so that kind of helped pushed me a little bit quicker after the internship to really study for that dietitian exam. So now I'm working as a clinical dietitian full-time at the hospital here.
That's amazing. And I love that credential. I like to ask people who've done the internship, like how the Ndtr credential helped them out. But you just mentioned it, that they hired you and you were an Ndtr. So when you were working, were you interning and getting paid at the same time? How did that work?
No, so I still interned. I didn't get paid for it. And then as soon as I was done, they were like, you can continue and work for us with your Ndtr. And then they just signed off on my notes and, helped me along the way with any questions that didn't come up during my internship. So I didn't really get to learn. And then once I got my RD, I was pretty much, they still help me out every once in a while because I'm a new RD, but yes. They don't have to sign off on my notes. I'm able to go up to patient rooms alone and like provide education, things like that. So
yes. Okay. So they hired you almost as like already eligible, but you had that extra credential, the Ndtr credential. So from your perspective, did that credential, I mean, you mentioned it giving you confidence when you're at the WIC job, but having it at the clinical job, even though when you were already eligible, did it add anything to you? Do you think you could have done without it? What are your thoughts on that? Or were you able to explain to your clients that you're an Ndtr? How did you handle that Ndtr credential during that in-between phase?
yeah, so I think it actually really helped because I don't think with like the different, red tape that can come from going in a clinical setting and everything, that it would have been a lot more pressure to really get my RD as soon as I possibly could. And I think that Ndtr credential really helped me to feel confident in my position and helped them to feel confident in me because I'd already gone through that process of studying and passing and keeping up on my continuing education credits and everything. And so I think I do think the Ndtr credential really helps.
Yeah. I like that you said that, Mariah, because it's like there's all that pressure once you have the job, like you have to pass the exam and it's hard. Both exams are difficult, but having that Ndtr credential, technically you were allowed to do everything you're doing as an Ndtr with the dietitian signing you off. So like you said, if you didn't pass, like you still are functioning in a way that's legal and allowed as an Ndtr with the dietitian. So that's awesome. That's awesome. So being an Ndtr, I know you're a dietitian now, but looking back at your time at WIC and then during your internship and during that in between, was there anything annoying or frustrating with the credential that you held during that time?
Yeah, so I think the only thing that kind of frustrated me was a little bit was trying to find out the scope of practice. Just being like a standalone Ndtr, because in the future I do have plans to have my own practice and actually hopefully with my husband who will go to med school. So we could be like this dynamic duo and everything. But I think I even printed out the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics like scope of practice, and I was trying to read through it and it was a little bit confusing. And so trying to see what I could do by myself without like an RD over me was a little bit frustrating. But that's really all I found so far that was challenging for me.
Okay, yeah. The scope of practice can be so confusing. I'm so there with you because it's the way it's worded. It's like you can do everything, but you also can't do some things. And so, but yeah, so figuring all of that is tricky, but that's a cool dream you have with your husband to do nutrition and whatever he's doing in the medical field. You can really heal somebody if you're balanced that way with both sides.
Yes, yeah, and I always tell him too. I'm like, in my experience, sometimes the doctors sometimes don't listen as closely to recommendations that are provided. And so I always tell him, I'm like, make sure you listen to other professionals in your field. They're professionals for a reason.
Yeah. Sometimes and even dietitians, sometimes we can be like, or Ndtrs, like, we only do nutrition and only us. And it's like, we also can listen to other professions too. So
right. Yeah.
we can all, that's good advice for just any and everything that's out there. Was your internship cut short because of the pre-experience you had in community?
So my hours were cut down a little bit, but only in the community section. And they were actually cut down anyway because the academy cut down from 1,200 to 1,000 hour requirement because of COVID. And a lot of interns had to do their rotations virtually and things like that. And so it was cut down a little bit. And so I didn't get to do, like, if I wanted to go to like a Head Start or somewhere else, but only in that community section, which I think helped me really focus on the other ones I was really interested in.
Yeah. And that's good to be able to focus on a weakness essentially and turn it into a strength, which clearly it's a strength now because you're working in the field. So making that transition from community to food service and more so clinical, what was the thing that was like just so challenging for someone listening who wants to make that jump into a different field of dietetics? Like what stood out to you from community to clinical nutrition?
I think what stood out from community to clinical is just how in depth you can go with clinical, and how much more freedom you have to be like, doctor diagnosed you with this. We really got to look at this versus, providing education to someone who may not really want it sometimes, or they just they need information in it really quickly. Whereas in a clinical setting, you really have to take your time and really explain certain things to them, and trying to be able to explain that while they're not feeling good and they're in the hospital, especially since I'm in acute care and they don't stay for long periods of time. And so trying to, like, if someone's newly diagnosed diabetes, trying to find a way to provide them with the basic and general information they need while they're there, but not overwhelming them with so much information that it's just going over the top of their heads because they don't feel good, and encouraging them to come to our outpatient services. So I think switching from, it definitely was a mindset because I did part-time WIC, part-time clinical for a while. Switching from, okay, I'm providing nutrition education to I'm providing medical nutrition therapy. That was a big jump and a challenge for my brain.
Yeah, because those are two, they're very different. One is just so much more in depth. And like your example earlier with the mom, like one is like preventing a really bad complication. One is like you're at that complication. And so you have to be very careful with how you educate. That's very well said. Which brings me to my next question. You kind of touched on it a little bit just with diversity in the field. And so I like to ask this question any way you want to interpret it. And you already kind of mentioned the diversity in your clientele that you've experienced with talking to, but what's your experience with diversity working as an Ndtr and now a dietitian in the field of dietetics?
Yeah, so regarding diversity, I've been exposed to different thoughts and values and experiences through my time, like you said, as WIC, an Ndtr or an RD at the hospital, and honestly, just who I follow, like on Instagram, like different dietitians and things like that. So I know while the basics and the facts of nutrition and dietetics don't really change, unless till science reveals that they change. Really, there are so many different approaches in how you can communicate nutrition to different people. And so I don't have too much of diversity that way, but really in how you kind of communicate the information. I still consider myself pretty new in clinical dietetics. And like I said before, I'm in such a rural area. We don't have a lot of experience with too much of a diverse population that you would see in a more urban area and things like that. So I don't have too much, but definitely different schools of thought have come up, and I've had discussions with like my preceptors and now my colleagues to really kind of see how to approach certain things.
Okay, Mariah, I'm going to have to ask for an example. Different schools of thought. Talk more about that. What has come up for that with the people that you're able to work with?
Yeah, so one of the big ones that we were kind of thinking about is the health at every size movement, because you see a lot of, my understanding is the healthy at every size came about to make sure that medical professionals weren't disregarding certain things because of somebody's size, and how it's kind of changed and been misinterpreted and things like that into everybody's healthy at every size, where we know that like obesity and other things or obesity with other comorbidities can be very damaging. And so just things like that and how it's changing and everything like that. And just having those discussions, and being able to have those discussions in like a civil and, respectful manner is actually really helpful to opening my eyes and how to approach things, and my colleagues too.
That is excellent. Just the diversity in the field and like how we have to fight against what is coming up in the media. And so are those conversations with your fellow dietitians or are they with patients? Who are you having that conversation with?
Mostly with my fellow dietitians. Just for now, sometimes a patient will bring it up briefly, but usually they don't really want to talk too much about it. So they're like, okay, whatever you want to do, then we're fine. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love that because it's the obesity paradox. And you're probably familiar with that. Like if you're obese, it can be actually beneficial for you, but then the comorbidities, then that's really where the problem comes in. So, and then having those conversations makes NDTRs and dietitians less biased when they're working with a patient population because they're just like, aware of all of the different slews and all of the different situations that they can run into, and knowing that obesity does not necessarily mean unhealthy, but it can if there's comorbidities. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
super, such a good point. Thank you for bringing that up and sharing that on the take up diversity. And so I know WIC has a lot of continual education classes that are kind of built into the job, but now looking forward in your career working in clinical, what are your thoughts for continuing education? And are you keeping the Ndtr credential or are you going to let that pass away?
So I'm not quite sure yet on keeping the NDTR or letting it pass away yet. But I have had some continuing education credits for it, especially that sticky one, that ethics one, that you always have to get. I've got that down. And then I actually signed up for this. I think this is kind of what you're asking, like what continuing education credits would I start to, or I'm interested in. This University of Florida, I think nutrition and dietetics graduate students are actually presenting, and they're doing like a couple weeks thing of like 34 presentations, or 20 or 34, and they have different topics and everything. So I'm going to do that. And then I did the Nevada Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics annual conference. And that was really helpful because you get to kind of network with people and then just kind of go through there. I would rather it be in person than over Zoom, but it was good. And I was able to learn a lot of information from it. And I thought that was really, really interesting.
That's networking conferences. That's perfect because then you get to meet more people. Hopefully there's more dietitians in Nevada than just in your little four that it's in your.
Yes, yeah, oh, lots. They're mostly in Vegas and
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And then one more question I want to ask, if you can remember, what were the big differences that you noticed from the Dtr exam versus the dietitian exam?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit fuzzy on the NDTR just because the RD is so fresh in my mind.
Yes.
But the process was the same, which I was really excited because NDTR, I remember being very, very nervous. I had never taken like a professional exam like that before, where you had to go in, like if you wear glasses, like you have to show them your glasses to make sure you don't have anything on, and like lock away your phone. And like, if you need something, you have to raise your hand and wait. So it was really intense. The NDTR, I remember it being very intense. And like I said before, it was more food service focused. So I really focused on that. And the RD exam is mostly clinical. And so I really tried to transition my thinking towards clinical for the RD exam. But I do remember still both of the exams having like pretty critical thinking scenarios. So you take the basics that you've learned and put them into practice, basically into a question. And so that was pretty similar between those two. So I felt a lot more calm taking the RD exam after knowing what the process was kind of going to look like, because of the NDTR exam.
That's great. I love all the benefits of the NDTR, having that as a foundation, because it does really help you when you step up or you change to the dietitian credential. And so from your whole story, if you could look back and give yourself some advice, or even just give the NDTR audience some advice, what would you say?
I think, take your own path. I felt sometimes that, like, and I don't know if it was other people making me feel this way or myself, because I like to push myself, but to really get the RD credential as soon as you can. And I really liked my slow pace. I was able to graduate, I was able to get married, I was able to enjoy working as a WIC nutritionist. And then I was like, okay, I'm ready to take another step. And so then came the Ndtr credential, which was really beneficial and worked out so well for me. And then I got to be that for a couple years, do my internship. And then I was able to get my RD. And I had a little bit of a setback with taking my RD exam, but it still worked out really well. And so I think taking your own path instead of trying to push forward like everybody else is really a really good piece of advice I'd like to give.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I feel that that's a theme that all of the NDTRs that I've spotlighted who have moved on to the dietitian credential, that's what they say, because it might feel like you're stepping back and you're slow, but when you become that dietitian, you're at that same level because you're so far advanced. You had the experience at WIC with the community, you have better networking things, and just you probably have good ways of talking to patients quickly after having to simplify all of your messages at WIC. So yeah, that's awesome advice. And I hope everyone listening takes that to heart and doesn't rush their journey, but takes their time and lets it evolve for themselves. And so, Mariah, how can people find you if they want to follow your story, follow what you're doing, or just ask you more questions?
Yeah, so I have a public Instagram account. It's One Sassy Avocado. And that one I post, I hadn't as much because I went to my internship and then I was working so much, but I would post like nutrition tips and information on there. And then I started sharing part of my internship journey. And then when I passed my exams and everything. So that One Sassy Avocado on Instagram.
Perfect. So make sure you find One Sassy Avocado on Instagram so you can follow Mariah and just see what she's doing. Keep her in your Instagram followers to have a dietitian in your following. And that is our spotlight. Is there anything else you want to add before we close out today?
No, thank you so much for being patient and waiting for me to get on here. It's been an honor.
Yes. And I'm so thankful for all the things you shared. So many great takeaways about the benefits of being in a DTR before you continue your journey to be a dietitian. So make sure you like, comment, subscribe if you're listening or watching. Thank you so much for your time, and we will see you in our next spotlight.